So by 1860, the property around Lake Fred goes to Gloucester Furnace, and then gets sold to the GFTA, which is the Gloucester Farm and Town Association, which is the ones who settled Egg Harbor City, grid off the land and all that.
Yep.
So that's 1854 they purchased it, and by 1860 they might not needed that sawmill.
Gotcha.
So they just let it go defunct, or they never owned it, and the people who did let it go defunct. So we don't actually know what happened to that second sawmill.
Right.
We know that Woodruff and Caldwell sold it before very long at all.
Yeah, I think it was by 1819.
To Blackman.
And I, according to Paul's shop, I believe it's in the Sojourn.
Mm-hmm.
I believe he called it like a little mill, or like it was a smaller mill. So that might be
Right.
going back to what happened to the first one. It might have never been able to be a big mill.
Too far up the road.
Too far up the road.
Not enough wood.
And you have Morris mills that are down
Other
the
mills
further,
down the river. Yeah.
that just might have had more money or more.
So once we get past the mill stage, and I know we're in the middle of the 19th century now, the 1850s, 60s, and it gets a little iffy. When do cranberries pick up?
I mean, the
Because
earliest
cranberry craze starts around the 1860s in Jersey.
in 1880s, we found on a map indication that it was at that point a cranberry bog.
Do you understand how cranberries grow? Do you know anything about?
A little bit, but not.
So they don't
I would
actually.
definitely not call myself an expert.
Well, I mean, like they actually grow in. They don't actually grow in water. And one of the things to get rid of bugs and things like that, and prevent it from getting frost on the vines and things, is to flood the bogs. So cranberries, like you always see in commercials, ocean spray and all that stuff. That's years later.
It's wet harvesting.
Yeah, it's called wet harvesting. Those berries can only be juiced.
Okay.
The bag of berries that you buy is dry harvested. That's what was done here. They were hand picked. So the way that they were able to put 1 inch of water over the vines was to have a flat bottom that all the vines would grow in.
Very level.
A defunct pond has a flat bottom. So a lot of mill ponds throughout South Jersey turned into cranberry bogs because it already was an open area
was kind of there.
with a flat bottom.
Sure.
And most of us is all sand, so that kind of helped them out too. So it was a logical thing that they would go from a mill pond to cranberries.
Because of the structure of it with the flat bottom already there.
By 1882, it was a known process and thing to do, was to take an old mill pond and turn it into cranberries.
But by 1870, cranberry industry was blowing up throughout South Jersey. What's interesting is based on this 1946 magazine article that we had, which taught us a lot about what happened here. There wasn't much to know other than that the Fletcher interview. Between the two of those things, provided us with just about everything we needed to know about cranberry industry here at Lake Fred. In that, it is mentioned that in 1946 that talking to I'm assuming an old timer, yeah, or it might have been I don't know if it was what was the name of the
Old man
Lingelbach.
Yeah.
That his grandfather how many years ago was that? Like
80 years ago, it was.
80 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, when you do the math, it comes out to be like right about 1850s, 1855, 1860.
Okay.
So that little clue might indicate that Lake Fred was a cranberry bog long before 1880s, which was the first time we've seen it indicated on the map, and which would make it one of the earlier cranberry bogs in our area.
Well, and it was owned. Is it the 1880s or 1900s? It was owned by A.J. Ryder. He was a big cranberry guy all over.
In 1900,
Yeah.
two gentlemen, Andrew Jackson Ryder and George E. Gosler. Ryder was from Hamilton, Gosler was from Egg Harbor City. They formed the Pomona Fruit Company.
Mhm.
And the Pomona Fruit Company was comprised of 3 bogs, one of which was Lake Fred. The other 2 were up in
Ides Branch.
like up in Wading River area, Wading River near Chips Folly Campground. Interestingly, just a side note, one of those bogs is where Don Bragg, our first,
We've talked about that.
he built his home on
Is it? Okay.
Lake Bragg, which he
Yes.
named it.
Yes.
That was one of the 3
I
cranberry
did,
bogs.
that's very interesting to know. Yeah.
But I digress there.
Right.
So that was 1900. I think they incorporated in, was it 1903? I think is the exact year.
Yeah.
Can you give the highlights of the Fletcher interview? We're sort of looking back at an early 1978 interview with old man Lingelbach. You remember it well enough to sort of give highlights and tip our hat to somebody who did this before us.
So first of all, thank you so much for doing what you're doing here, because we used something from 1978 in our research that filled in a lot of voids.
Oh, that's right.
So doing this for hopefully in the future does make a difference. Basically, it was his family that took care of the bogs.
The Lingelbach.
The Lingelbach
Right.
family.
Right.
They didn't own them. They were just the caretakers.
Managers,
Yeah.
And they're the ones that would flood it if it needed and all that stuff.
do a lot of the physical work.
The actual harvesting, it only took 1 month, I do believe. So other than that, the bogs kind of take care of themselves. Like the family maintains it. They bring in workers to pick it for 1 month, and then
And there was things they had to do. They sand them.
Right.
They maintain the dams and
Right.
the dikes and all
Right.
that.
So that actual Fletcher report gave us, there was men and women that used to pick the bogs here.
The type of berries. He
Uh,
mentions different types
yes.
of berries. He's got different varietals.
I don't remember if we mentioned children, but oftentimes they were involved.
They were.
Picking the
Yeah, he actually went over it was what did it say? It was 120 acres. Like the actual size of the bogs themselves and how they, kind of over the years after his family no longer maintained the bogs, they kind of went downhill, which leads right back into the Palmer thing of what actually happened to the Lake Fred bogs. He went through, what was it, like 500 bushels, and he kind of described how big the harvest was,
Right.
and all that
and the
kind of stuff.
different varieties of
Yeah.
cranberries that were grown.
He describes, remember rebuilding the bridge at the bottom of the lake and
Yes.
pounding that with
Yes.
weights and coming in with a
Tin Lizzie.
Tin Lizzie.
Yes.
And,
Crumplemona.
from down Louisville, I presume, down the dirt
Yeah.
road. You couldn't get the big trucks in.
And
Yeah,
I found a newspaper article. There was early century where the bogs were vandalized.
Okay.
Yeah, and I thought that was, and it mentions lingle bogs and all.
Right. So Ray, we're talking about a 13-minute audio cassette that's down in Special Collections, which is just gold. And if it could only be 130 minutes, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
And so one of the reasons why I wanted to get these two and others in the room is that 13-minute cassette.
So John Lingelbach was the son of, I think it was Charles Lingelbach, the owner of the bog. But he done a lot of the work, of course,
Right.
growing up. And by the time Fletcher had
Mark Fletcher.
Mark Fletcher, that's right,
Yeah.
reached out to him as part of his project. I think he was quite an old man.
Yeah, he's got
So
the raspy
he looked-
voice
yeah,
with
he
the
does.
call.
He had the
In the 70s at least, let's say.
great character in his voice. You can almost like visualize him.
Yeah, I know.
Very cool. Maybe even like it could be looked at as like an example of piney vernacular sort
Right,
of thing
right.
too.
Oh yeah, you have to listen to that too.
Yeah.
You have to think about what he's saying.
Yeah.
But like even he said that it wasn't a sawmill, it was a grist mill
Okay.
that fell in. And
Right.
you know, looking back, it's like you say, you wish it was 103 minutes. Like there's a whole bunch more questions.
Right.
We had the historic angle that we
Right.
would love to have asked
Oh,
him,
sure.
you know, and that information is now gone.
Let me go a slightly different route. You mentioned early on, mentioned that what we think of as Lake Fred was a beaver pond. But if we think about it, am I right to say that this is just a stream that did get dammed up, certainly by beaver at some point, it says it did, and then get dammed by man, but fundamentally Lake Fred's not a lake, it's a dammed stream, or
Right.
creek, whatever you want
Yes.
to call it. Can you tell us, Claude Epstein has named the upper part above the lake Cedar Run, but you know who originally owned it. What might we name that, if not Cedar Run?
So at one point in time, it
Yes.
was known as the Robert Smith's Mill Branch.
Okay.
Robert Smith is the one who owned the
Oh,
sawmill.
right.
I also have reference to an Amos's branch, which could have been a predecessor to that.
Okay.
That's either Amos branch
Right.
or the one that parallels College Drive and goes by the sewer plant and
Yes.
water plant.
Yes,
That's Amos's
That's good.
branch.
That we canaled out for drainage
Right.
when
that's right.
Beaver
That's
Parish
been
was,
manipulated. Yeah. Right.
But that was something all the way back.
Okay. That was always a waterway.
It was always
That we know of.
of some sort.
the significance of the Beaver Dam, though, in our studies of other mill sites, it seems to be the beaver would create their dams where there was too fast point of land,
They're good
They can
engineers.
anchor it,
Yeah,
right.
they understand.
and that seemed to precede the building of a sawmill in more than a few occasions. You know,
So there'd be
they're
some
choosing the
some
same.
person coming into the area thinking, "Ooh, Beaver Dam."
Yeah.
The ad in 1771 or 1770 talks about the forks
Yes.
on the middle branch, which is actually the original name of the waterway that starts out by Deer Street,
Okay.
and is known as Morris Mill Branch.
Yes.
Is actually the middle branch of the Nakoti Creek tributaries. So that was the original name, was Middle Branch, and then became Morris Mill Branch. You ever been on Moss Mill Road?
Yes.
That actually is Morris Mill. Morris's Mill's right there where that campground is, in that area.
Okay.
And it's just, they dropped the R and it's known as Moss Mill.
So let me back up. I'm slightly
Makes
confused.
sense.
Robert Smith's mill run, is that
Cedic runs.
right? But that's not the middle branch.
It's a tributary to
It's
the
a tributary to.
To-
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
In that original ad talked about the forks
Yes.
of Middle Run,
Yes.
which is in the middle of Lake Fred, is actually where the two
The
come.
confluence.
Yes. Okay. And one of those is Robert Smith,
Yes.
and the other one is
Known as Morris's Mill still
okay.
today.
Okay.
But in that ad talks about a good place for a sawmill.
Okay.
So that's what they were advertising it as
Right.
way back then.